I don't know about you, Tom, but I am more excited than Jim James in an empty grain silo for today's episode. My Morning Jacket, coming up next on the world's most civil music show, Courtesy Listen.
Welcome to Courtesy Listen,
the podcast that explores an artist's entire catalog.
We'll listen to every studio album
and any other essential recordings,
sharing our thoughts along the way.
Some of those albums will be good,
and some will be bad, but they all deserve
a courtesy listen. All right, Tom, welcome back. We are talking this week about My Morning Jacket here on Courtesy Listen. I'm so excited to get into this, chat through this with you. Before we do, though, I want to take a quick second and just I think, speak for Tom and myself both, we are just blown away by what we've heard from people listening and checking out the podcast. So thank you to everybody who has listened, who has commented, who has reached out to Tom and me about, emails and texts and things about it. So it's great. Don't hold back.
Yeah, I echo what Adrienne said. I am delighted that anybody finds our musings on music to be interesting. And we've gotten a lot of great feedback, a lot of people asking when the next episode is coming out, and that's always fun. So thank you. Thank you to anyone who's commented, who's listened, who's subscribed, certainly. Don't know why you would, but thank you all the same.
Listen, more than 2 views means that somebody other than you and I are checking it out. So that's great.
That's true.
I would love to hear, as we're going through these episodes, if people have kind of the same, top 3, bottom 1 for these bands that we're discussing. I would love to see that in the comments and kind of see what people think. Or maybe if they've discovered something new after listening to the episode, would love to hear that. Maybe you think we have terrible opinions and you want to fight. That's allowed too. So thank you to everybody.
Yeah, I agree. I love hearing, even if you're saying that my opinions are terrible. And I do want to shout out to Adrienne's friend who was mortified that I liked Butch Vig's production of a Nirvana album over Steve Albini's. I enjoyed hearing that as well.
Thanks, Tim. We appreciate that feedback, Tim. Yeah, Tom really dug that, so that's awesome. Let's see. Well, jumping right in, we are talking about My Morning Jacket today, who have been around for 20 plus years at this point. Tom, when do you first, when did you first maybe know of My Morning Jacket, listen to My Morning Jacket? What's your history with this band?
So I was trying to figure this out, and I will say, since I'm not the host of this episode, I did no research at all because there was a lot of their catalog that I had never heard before, and I didn't want to be influenced in any way by seeing what the reviews were or anything like that. So I couldn't go back and see exactly when albums were released or things like that. I think Z came out in 2005, and I bought Z not immediately, but pretty soon after it came out because Becky and I had gotten Pearl Jam tickets. My Morning Jacket was opening for Pearl Jam, and this would have been 2006. I already knew the band. I already knew Z backwards and forwards at that point. So I think I had read about it on a blog or something, and I picked up Z, and I just fell in love with the album immediately. I was blown away by it, and then slowly discovered a lot of their other catalog as well. So how about you, Adrienne? When did you discover My Morning Jacket?
Going to say you had pretty much the same experience as the vast majority of people, which is Z was the entry point for a lot of people. And that came out in 2005. I can remember prior to 2005, 2002, maybe 2003, maybe 2003 or so, 2002, downloading My Morning Jacket, illegally downloading, forgive me everyone, from LimeWire, tracks from My Morning Jacket, early tracks, which now I listen to, and I'm like, God, this is horrendous. Why, what about it, right? But we'll get to that later. But, knowing a little bit of their stuff beforehand and enjoying it, I bought Z, right when it came out in 2005, and I played that, constantly. I think I had that going constantly. I remember being at my first kind of real job in my office, which was down in a basement in the back of nowhere, nobody else around me. I had a huge computer server tower in the room with me that was this loud fan running all day. And so I just had Z cranking to combat that. So that was kind of my intro, and then have to them, and have kind of stayed with them in bits and pieces here and there. Some of this music, a lot of it was new to me, this listen through for the podcast. So this was a good experience, and I'm glad that this was the pick, and I got to hear some things and develop my love for the band a little bit more. So
yeah, it was a great choice.
That's good. Well, let's get started with our first album. We have the Tennessee Fire, which was released in 1999. So the first few albums that My Morning Jacket released were all recorded in Above the Cadillac Studios in Shelbyville, Kentucky, where they're from. Above the Cadillac Studios was an apartment above Johnny Quaid, the original guitarist, Johnny Quaid's grandmother's garage. And so they kind of camped out there, recorded some music. These albums are, like very, very demo, early stuff. So what did you think about this album, the first album, Tennessee Fire, as you listened to it, Tom?
So I was always aware of the Tennessee Fire. Certainly when I discovered the band, I had never heard it before, other than maybe a handful of tracks on it that I had heard on a live album. I didn't like it. It is really lo-fi, and it doesn't really sound like them. There aren't really any hooks to speak of in the music. And when you say, I didn't know that it was recorded above a garage, that explains a lot. I wrote in my notes that it sounds like it was recorded in a garbage can. I went back a second time, and actually, because I listened to this first, and then I went back because, we actually were planning to record a few days ago, and then, things came up. So it gave me an opportunity to give this a second listen. I'm like, maybe I wasn't being fair. I didn't enjoy it more the second time.
Yeah, you hated it even more the second time.
Yeah.
Well, that garbage can recording is exactly what they were going for. All of these first 2 or 3 albums, there's a lot of talk of how they were recorded. They were recorded in an empty grain silo to get that reverb sound that My Morning Jacket is so known for. And yeah, it really sounds very primitive, right? I think when I listen to this album, I think this is like a baby photo of the band, where you look at it, you listen to it, and you're like, okay, I can hear how they've grown out of that sound into this more polished, more developed sound where they are, but you can kind of see the reverb, the falsetto, the kind of like southern rock, layers upon layers of music. So all of those things were there, just in very, very kind of beginner stages with this first album. So did you have any favorite tracks on this, or were you just like...
I was really trying to pick one out, and I mean, there were even a couple I had recognized from like live albums, and I'm like, well, let me just... And it's just, I couldn't do it. Even like The Bear, I think The Bear is on there, and it just was not enjoyable to me.
Yeah. The Bear is like the best known track from this album. Evelyn Is Not Real is one that I enjoy just because it kind of has this like jam interlude in the middle. The other thing that really stuck out to me as I listened through all these albums that was present even from the beginning is that lyrically, I feel like they're such an odd band lyrically. Jim James writes pretty much 99% of all the music.
Yeah.
You can tell that someone has like put thought into writing these lyrics, but you're not really quite sure what they mean or where they're trying to get you or what it's about. But it's not just this simple like, let's rhyme car and bar and far. It's more advanced than that. But still, you're like, this is gibberish. This is just kind of somewhat educated gibberish. So, that's all present there in the beginning. So Tennessee Fire for me, not one of the best, but definitely got them their wheels rolling. So that was good.
I will say, as a final thought, I saw that it got like some kind of big 25th anniversary re-release this year, and I'm like, why would you bother remastering this? Because I don't know what you could do to polish this up, because it kind of just is what it is, which I realize some people like, but I just thought that was kind of funny.
That's for the collector who's just trying to round out their collection, right? It's like,
Yeah.
oh, all I need is Tennessee Fire. Well, here you go. You can, spend your $30 and get it. So,
Yeah.
let's see here. Next up, 2001, we have At Dawn. Tom, you tell me your thoughts on At Dawn, and then I'll chime in with mine.
So at Dawn, I was aware of a lot more of the tracks because a lot more of them have become live staples. But again, I really had never listened to the album before. I've never owned it. Leaps and bounds better than the Tennessee Fire. Like, you can actually hear what would become what I consider to be like their signature sound start to take shape here. Lot more in the way of like guitar solos for one thing. They start to get into that more and just kind of stretching their legs musically, I think. I really like Low Down, the way that he sings, Bermuda Highway. And then I knew this song as a live song because this is kind of one of their most famous live tracks. But Phone Went West is like a staple of their live show. The album version's a little, it doesn't really go anywhere. Whereas live, I think they really take that song to another level. But it was still neat hearing kind of the original. So yeah, vast improvement over Tennessee Fire.
Over Tennessee Fire, right. Well, they've gotten more popular here. Oddly enough, when they're first starting out, they're really, really popular in the Netherlands of all places, and like topping the charts in the Netherlands. So that kind of, they did a European tour in here this time frame and kind of got, their name out a little bit because of that. So, a lot of the tracks on this one are ones that you'll know. Bermuda Highway is the best known track from this album. The way that he sings, that one I really enjoy. There's that great halftime breakdown in the middle of that.
Yeah.
And Honest Man. I think between the way that he sings and Honest Man, those two kind of give you an idea of like how they're going to progress into more of this like jam band, which they have said again and again that they really don't like that kind of lumping them in with the jam band, because the jam band kind of just noodles around and has no plan and has no like beginning or end to where in mind. And they do when they set these things up, even when they're playing these like live tracks. Hopefully is a great stripped down love song on here. It's a great example of Jim James's voice with a lot of that reverb, the falsetto. And I don't know if you caught this or not, Tom, but this hopefully opens the track with one of your favorite musical items is the bow on the guitar, which I know you brought up when we were talking about Led Zeppelin. Go back and listen to Hopefully starts with that bow on the guitar.
I retract every positive thing I say.
So, notably, one of the tracks on here on this album is called Death is the Sleazy Pay, is the title of the track here. Was much more well known as one of their early tracks that I had downloaded from LimeWire with a different title, and they adjusted the title for the album, make it a little more PC. So yeah, I think At Dawn is a good kind of primer. Hopefully too many people didn't get introduced to Tennessee Fire and then write off My Morning Jacket for the rest of time. At Dawn, I think, is a much more kind of My Morning Jacket 101 album.
Yeah, agreed. Agreed. This is really where, you kind of see the template for what the band would do, at least for the next few albums. Yeah. You bring up the jam band thing, and I was going to talk about that later. And, jam band, at least, in my more formative years, was really a derogatory term. Mm-hmm. People used it dismissively to, I think, indicate that a band they were poor songwriters and that they would just kind of extend their songs because
aimlessly, just
because they didn't have good musical ideas, I guess, and noodling, I think, is what you would call it. And I don't know if I still feel that being a jam band is something to not aspire to. But nonetheless, I think that will inform some of our discussion going forward.
Yep. All right, so 2001, At Dawn, we move along. We now have 2003. They release It Still Moves. What did you think of this album, Tom?
Well, this is a classic, of course. This was the second My Morning Jacket album that I bought. shortly after Z. I bought this one, and so I know it well. It's a great album through and through, but the first half of this album is just a monster. Of course, Magita, great song. Dance Floors is probably my favorite track on this on the album. Dance Floors is a great song. Great lyrics to that one. I don't necessarily consider them to be a great lyrical band. I don't put too much stock into their lyrics, but that's one that does resonate with me. Golden, of course, is just a gorgeous song. I think probably their best acoustic song, in my opinion. One Big Holiday is great. The guitar solo that ends it is unbelievable. And I will say, I don't know. I'm sure it's them alternating to a point, but I don't know who plays sort of the main guitar solo at the end. But there are a couple of phrases in that extended guitar solo that, I mean, live rent-free in my head. They're just so good.
Mm-hmm. Well, your choice there for guitars on this album are either Jim James singing and playing guitar, or Johnny Quaid, who was their original guitarist, who actually was Jim James's cousin, Jim James's cousin, and would leave the band after this album. So, if it was
that explains a lot.
Yeah, yeah. If it was him and then he pieced out, or maybe it was Jim playing the guitar. But I do appreciate how a lot of these guys are kind of very musical, and when you look at the kind of the credits here, you have people doing all sorts of different things, and it's not just like you're the guitarist and you're the bassist, and there's no overlap. So you can tell that they're strong musicians for sure.
Oh yeah. How about you? What about your take on It Still Moves?
Yeah, It Still Moves. I enjoy this album a lot. I think because it does have a lot of those well-known tracks. Dance Floors is a favorite of mine and has made its way onto quite a few of my party playlists. Dance Floors always shows up, right? Dance Floors, great jam, and Easy Morning Rebel. When I hear that, you listen to that and you're thinking like, wow, these guys would probably be pretty good live. Like the more and more I listened to as these albums progressed, it was like, I have not seen them live before, and the more and more I listen to them, I'm like, I need to get to a show. I need to get to a My Morning Jacket show. They're actually coming in about a month here. They'll be somewhat, not really close to us, but close enough. And I keep saying to Andy, like, don't you want to go? Can't we go to this show? And it's, I don't think it's going to work out. But Easy Morning Rebel was one of those ones that I was like, this would be a great live track. It Still Moves was the first album that they did on kind of a bigger label, so they had more money to work with. They kind of had more production.
The budget is clear. I mean, the difference in budget from the first two to this one is staggering.
Absolutely. Well, and they've gotten more of their name out there, so there's also more expectation. So with that comes a little bit of pressure to do better, right? And thankfully they weren't still at Tennessee Fire level at this point. That they're doing a little bit better than they were. Let me see here. This one, there is some turnover here. Their drummer leaves before this album. Their original drummer, I think you can hear that. I think you can hear that the drums definitely get better.
Oh yeah.
From the first two albums.
Yeah.
I'm not the drummer. You're the drummer, Tom. So you tell me if I'm right or wrong. But there's a few changes in personnel around this time over the next few albums, and I think it really is for the better when you listen to the album. So.
Yeah, I didn't notice offhand that the drummer left. I attributed it to the production that they just had, that they were able to mix it better. But it makes sense that it was a completely different person. I will say the one thing that I've never, and I know it's like their kind of the showpiece of their live set. The one song on here that never really did it for me is Steam Engine. And it's like, I think it's like their closer usually in their live show. I just don't really think it has a melody. It's really long, and it just doesn't really do it for me. But the rest of the album is flawless. And yeah, I mean, this is one that I will put on frequently. It's just a great album
for sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely. All right. So then after It Still Moves, we move on to what you and I know as kind of our intro to My Morning Jacket, which is Z. Came out in 2005. Z was like a totally kind of different sound than these first few albums. We're no longer in the grain silo. Johnny Quaid has left the band, and so Grandma and Grandpa's Farm is no longer available, right? So they have they're more well known. They got more money. They're on this bigger label. They're recording in different places, and the sound really with the producers on this album, there's less of that kind of reverb, folky sound, and more kind of modern sound. There's a lot of synthesizers on here. We have a new keyboardist, and so you hear kind of more keyboard on this album than the
much
albums
more,
before.
much more.
And new guitarists. So, as these things are changing and the band lineup is changing, I definitely think it benefited them for sure.
Yeah.
What were your favorite tracks on this album?
Well, this is, I think, a near perfect album. I mean, it's tight. It's 10 tracks. It doesn't go on a second longer than you'd like. I mean, I think it clocks in, without knowing for sure, I think it clocks in around like 48 minutes or so. My favorite track is Lay Low, because I think it really blends their sound from their earlier albums with what they're doing at this point. Because a lot of this sounds a lot more like a contemporary indie rock record. There's still some reverb, there's still some twang, but a lot less than their previous albums. And I mean, it sounds like, and I don't mean this in a detrimental way, but it sounds like it could have been made by a lot of bands at that time if you take out Jim James's voice.
Sure.
So it's a lot more contemporary, I think, but it's great. It is. I will save. I'm not saying that it'll be in my top 3 at the end, but I will save whatever further praise I have for that time. I have another thought, but I want to hear your take on Z first.
Yeah, I like the first half / middle section of this album. And then I feel like, you said Lay Low at the end of the album is one of your favorites. I feel like it kind of falls off at the end of the album. So I really like It Beats For You, What a Wonderful Man, and those kind of that midsection. And then by the end, I've lost interest in this album. So, maybe that's because I played it to death, way back when. And maybe my tastes have changed now, but I think that this one is this one really kind of got their name out there. It's a great album. It was on so many like best of the 2000s lists. Any musical, anyone who did a best of the 2000s list, Z was on it. If you enjoy this album, should also check out their live album. I'm going to mess up the name. Okanokos. I always
something like that. Agreed, which is essentially this album live. So if you like Z, check out Okanokos. Yeah.
It has like 8 or 9 of the tracks from Z on that live album. Worth checking out. Yeah, for sure.
Absolutely. And the one thing I wanted to say was the track Over the Woods, which is a bizarre, both lyrically and in terms of like the noise, or not the noise, the music. I don't know why I said noise. The music sounds like if you played Nintendo 64, Super Mario 64, there was like this haunted ghost house that had like a carousel. It had this eerie circus music, and that is what that keyboard in Over the Woods sounds like.
Yeah.
But and I liked the tune, listening to it. It took a couple listens, I think, initially, but I enjoyed it. I didn't realize, nobody could have realized, but boy, that was really indicative of the direction they would be taking in the future. Like, I think I assumed,
kind of,
like, I think I assumed Lay Low was like, this is kind of the piece de resistance of the album, and this is what it's all going to sound like. You got the guitar solos, you got those like sections where like both guitars and the keyboard are all playing the same thing, like that's awesome. But no, that is not where they were headed, as we will see. They were headed more in the Over the Woods direction, for better or for worse.
Yeah, for sure. Let me see here if I have any other notes before we move on. This one I think was interesting to me as I was kind of reading about Z. Had a few interesting friendly people pop in to kind of help guest appearance in here. Andrew Bird did some of the strings on this. I don't know, Tom, if you're as familiar with Andrew Bird. He's a great whistler. He whistles in all of his own music, and he's whistling here. If you're ever wondering who's doing the whistling on this album, Andrew Bird, which makes sense.
Okay.
You know who that is. M. Ward, who... Jim James did... Jim James has all these side projects constantly. And actually, My Morning Jacket started as a side project to another one of Jim's original bands. But M. Ward, who did Monsters of Folk, which was kind of supposed to be this like folk supergroup with Jim James and Conor Oberst of Bright Eyes, also kind of had a little guest spot on this album. So that was interesting for me to see as I was reading about this. Like, okay, they're getting more involved in kind of the musical community as well.
Yeah. Two more things I have to say that I forgot.
Yep.
The first is I love when he quotes Madonna in Anytime. I've always really enjoyed that reference. And also, I love the opener, Wordless Chorus. And I will say live, when I actually saw them live, that was probably the highlight. They ripped that song. It was awesome. I think it's funny now, though, looking back and having gone through their whole catalog, because I do think they kind of struggle writing choruses. They're really good songs, have decent choruses, but more often than not, I find myself listening and being like, what's the chorus in this song, you know?
Where are we going with this? Yeah.
Like One Big Holiday, great song, doesn't have a chorus, you know?
No. It has just One Big Holiday, right?
Yeah.
It's funny that you mentioned that Madonna reference, because in one of their earlier albums, I believe maybe At Dawn, I saw a quote, Jim James somewhere, was when they were talking about recording that, you know, how did you do that? And he's like, we locked ourselves down with the necessities. Madonna's Greatest Hits album was like one of the things that he referenced. So you and My Morning Jacket share that affinity for Madonna.
Oh, we do. We do.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's see. So we have Z. Z really, blows them wide open in the general public. They're doing all this touring. They're really kind of more of a mainstream name now after Z. 2008 rolls around and we have Evil Urges. So Tom, tell me what you think about Evil Urges here.
Yeah. So at this point, I was a big fan of the band. I bought Evil Urges the day it came out on CD. I was disappointed, at the time, much like talking about number 4, the follow-up to Tiny Music from the last episode. I was not pleased with Evil Urges. My first take on it was that it was really long, and it wasn't a tight album like Z. It meandered a lot, had a lot of different sounds, kind of like Physical Graffiti, except it did feel bloated. That being said, there are some good tracks on it. I've always loved, of course, I'm Amazed. That's a great tune. It's got one of my favorite tropes of singing over the guitar solo at the end. I always loved that. Aluminum Park is a banger.
Yeah.
I like the opening track, the title track, Evil Urges. He's kind of like, Jim James kind of doing like a Prince thing on it, and I kind of enjoy that. But I remember listening through, I think really what turned me off the first time I listened to is I think it's like track 3 or 4, but Highly Suspicious is just the worst kind of experiment. And I listened to it again this time, like, okay, maybe it's 17 years later. Maybe I was wrong. No, I was not wrong. Highly Suspicious is awful. Librarian's pretty bad too. But most of this album, as the years have gone on, most of it's listenable. I think I was too hard on it. I think my expectations were just way too high coming off of Z. And I've slowly come around on it. And there's a few tracks that I do listen to fairly regularly.
Yeah. So this is great because I love this album. And this is like their most polarizing album. So we have you, who could probably leave it behind, and me, from beginning to end, I love this album. I think it's a great, complete album. By this point, all of the personnel changes among the band are solidified, and the lineup from Evil Urges on till today is the same lineup. So they've really kind of gotten themselves figured out of who they are as a band.
Yeah.
My favorite tracks on here, I really love, I don't know if you thought this or not, Tom, when you were listening to it, but as this opens with Evil Urges, this opens with this kind of bass drum, not bass, like triplet or 16th notes, was very reminiscent of kind of John Bonham drumming kind of like When the Levee Breaks opening. When we talked about Led Zeppelin a couple episodes ago, we talked about, their musical influence wide-reaching, and I really heard that in Evil Urges, listening
Interesting.
to that opening track. Yeah, go back and listen to it. And
I will.
tell me if you think that you hear that. And they've even, actually, side note here, they've even talked about how this kind of reverb that they did in the early albums, where they're, they have their vocalist or they have whatever, their speaker or whatever in this big open space with microphones far away to kind of get this reverb sound, natural reverb happening. They based a lot of that on what other bands had done in the past, including Led Zeppelin, which you didn't like, when they mic'd up John Bonham's drums with all these mics all over to get this big kind of rippling sound. Same thing here. So Evil Urges, really enjoyed. Touch Me, I'm Gonna Scream is a great one. Part 1 at the beginning of the album, Part 2 at the very end of the album. I really feel like they saw this the whole way through. Highly Suspicious is track 3, and for those uninitiated here, Highly Suspicious sounds like the Muppets are singing, right?
Yeah.
Which, after reading more about the band, reading more about Jim James, he was asked in an interview, like, what made you want to go into music? What made you kind of, what's your muse for this? And he said that he was 3 years old, watching TV, and he saw the Electric Mayhem Muppet Band and was like, this is what I want to do, right? And when I heard that, when I read that interview quote, I was like, this explains so much. So you listen to Highly Suspicious, you have like Rizzo the Rat singing lead, and then you've got like Cookie Monster in the background singing with this like grovelly voice. All of the voices are just like caricatures, right, of the band. And then you just picture Animal on the drum just beating that crash cymbal to death as this song plays. So knowing that, I was like, okay, this song is really weird, but maybe I can appreciate it for what it is, hearing kind of, that. I think my favorite track on this whole album is Smokin' from Shootin' down the end. Which
that's good tune.
I don't know, I feel emotion in that track that I don't really feel in necessarily a lot of their other tracks. I know that there are kind of some love songs sprinkled in here or there, or there are tunes about maybe heartbreak here or there. But this one, something about the music really just like, I think hammers that home. It kind of starts slowly. You have these kind of like pedal steel slides in there that kind of give it this like warm feeling. And it builds and builds and builds until it's this like full-blown rock song. I just love that track. I think if somebody said to me, like, what's the one My Morning Jacket song that I should listen to, I would tell them Smokin' from Shootin'. Not because it's like the best example of My Morning Jacket, but just because it's a song that really, I don't know, something about that just really speaks to me. So I love that one. And then I felt quite personally attacked listening to this album, the track Two Halves, which is about basically like the grass is always greener on the other side, old versus like youth versus getting older. And he says in the lyrics, 41, some things start to fade. And as a 41-year-old, I was like, Jim, you didn't have to say that. Like, we could just let it lie. So anyway, I love this album. I think this is a great album. This was the first of their Grammy nominations. So they were nominated for a Grammy for this album. They lost to Radiohead, which is, if you're going to lose to somebody, I guess losing to Radiohead
no shame
is
in
not
that.
Bad, right?
No shame in that.
And Tom, you might appreciate this. I don't know if anybody else will. And if you appreciate this, leave a comment. But the One Tree Hill Season 6 opening episode was entitled Touch Me, I'm Going to Scream, and had 2 of the tracks from this album as part of the One Tree Hill soundtrack. So I don't know where you are in your One Tree Hill.
Not that far, but I do have a guilty pleasure of One Tree Hill.
When you get to Season 6, you will understand
I'll keep
a
an
little
ear
bit better
open.
where it is. Yeah. So perfect album, top to bottom, even if the Muppets make an appearance on this. So that is Evil Urges. Again, another one that I'm going to probably incorrectly pronounce, but whatever. Circuital, 2011. How would you say that word, Tom?
I always said circuital, but you're probably right. It's probably
Circuital.
it's probably
Well,
circuital.
up until maybe like last week, I was saying circutial because I had
Yeah,
extra
I'm pretty
letters
sure it's
just
not
shoved in
that.
there. Yeah, that was wrong. But
We'll
of
go
a
with your
circuit.
your
Let's-
yes.
Circuital of a circuit, right?
Yeah.
So tell me what you think of this album with the name that we can't pronounce.
This is another album that I don't know if I bought it the day it came out, but I bought it. I was aware of its release, and I bought it shortly thereafter. And this was the album where I listened to it, and I was like, they're never going back to what I liked about them. And so I was crushed when I heard this. Crushed is the wrong word. Disappointed, and just it's kind of like, all right, I'm probably done listening to my Morning Jacket albums. Certainly buying them.
You really? I think this is more of a return, kind of, to their earlier stuff.
It is more. It certainly rocks harder than Evil Urges, I think, front to back. But they keep going in certain directions, and I'll get to that a little bit. The title track. I thought the title track is good. I like that one. But I'm going to ruin a song for you here. The Day Is Coming is a fairly neat track, but that vocal intro, that is Kiss from a Rose by Seal. It does like that. Da, 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 da. That, I cannot listen to that without thinking Kiss from a Rose. Also, I have to sing something every episode, and
That's
so
good.
that
That's a
was
good-
my
good
that was
track
my
to
singing.
choose. That's good.
I remember that when I first bought this album, I still remember listening to Holding On to Black Metal and being like, what is this? I hated it so much. I was like, this is, I was like,
so
what is
good.
this tabernacle choir like thing going
No,
on here?
That's what I love about it, and I want to get an invite to be in that backing group, which
It has grown
there
on.
hasn't really been. Yeah,
It's grown on me. I don't, now that I don't have, now that my expectations aren't being subverted, it's a fun track. I do like it. I like You Want to Freak Out. But like for all of these songs, The Day Is Coming, Holding On to Black Metal, You Want to Freak Out, I feel like they would be fun departures on an album that's full of like really strong songs. And I just don't feel like this is that. So it's still kind of disappointing to me, but re-listening to it was I think a lot more enjoyable, being sort of bereft of expectations.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm sorry to hear that because I really enjoy this album. I think the whole album to me feels like a wheel turning. Like as you're listening to it, I don't know if it's the drum beat or the time signature they chose or what, but it just feels like this spinning wheel. And I say that in a good way. Like it feels like forward momentum to me, forward motion. And I don't know, I love it. If you like the title tracks, you're cute. There is on Spotify or on the deluxe version of this album, I believe, is the band demo version, like the initial demo of that track, which has a slightly, to me at least, I haven't fact checked this anywhere, but slightly faster tempo than what's on the album, this album version. So if you want that circuital just kicked up a notch, go check out that band demo version, and it's just got a little bit more of a groove to it. The Day Is Coming is great. The syncopated drum beats in that song are really cool. Holding On to Black Metal is great. You Want to Freak Out. All of these things really, really enjoy. Now, some of these tracks were actually written to be included in the Muppet movie that came out in 2011, but got scrapped. And, poor Jim James, his whole, focus was to be a Muppet, be in the Muppet Band. He was this close to being in the Muppet Band, and, they missed out on that. So I thought that was interesting, hearing that, kind of how your life maybe comes full circle.
Yeah,
Wanting to be a
that's
Muppet.
interesting.
Let me see. Anything else for Circuital? Yeah, same 5 people. All the songs are written by Jim James. I like this album, Tom. Even if you don't, I enjoy this one. So that was 2011. And then there's a bit of a break here. The next album that we get is The Waterfall 1. in 2015. It's been a little while since they've recorded anything. They have gone from their like Kentucky, New York recording. Now they're in California to record The Waterfall. And The Waterfall is supposed to be this big like double album. When they're first setting out to record this, it's going to be this big double album. And they record about 22, 24 tracks for this, end up releasing just a small segment. What do you think about The Waterfall? What's your take on this album?
So this is the first time I had ever listened to it. I had never, at the time, I think I was vaguely aware they had put out a new album, but I didn't bother. I didn't like it. It is vastly different from their older stuff. I think, easy listening is maybe a term I would use. There are a couple of high points. I like Compound Fracture and Big Decisions.
Big Decisions.
But man, it was tough to get through a lot of that. And I just don't even know how to categorize the music they make from here on, how to label it. And maybe, maybe music isn't meant to be labeled. But if you asked me to say what genre their last 3 albums fall into, I wouldn't be able to tell you. Because it's definitely not Southern rock.
The early stuff is hard to categorize as well, but at least you have like a basic idea. You can be like, it's kind of like alt country Southern rock. Like you can get ballpark with those early albums, or there's some like genre, they're jumping genre to genre or overlap. Yeah, these later albums, you're like, what are we trying to do here? So yeah, The Waterfall, this one was recorded in California. It was kind of based on more of this like natural, let's take our focus from the natural world. I'm not really a big fan of this, except the tracks that you listed, Compound Fracture, Big Decisions. Big Decisions, actually, almost like I said, 99% of these songs are all written by Jim James. Big Decisions got a co-writing byline. Jim James and my guy, Dan Wilson of Semisonic, co-wrote Big Decisions. Yes, co-wrote this. And I enjoy this track so much. And the next time someone at my house asks me, what is for dinner? I'm going to look at them and I'm say, what do you want me to do? Make all the big decisions for you? And, it's just that little quote. I love that.
How about that
line right there? Yeah. Who knew, right?
Can we just acknowledge that they are basically living the plot of the song One Big Holiday? Like they fly to California and like co-write songs with the dude from Semisonic. Like that is, they have become part of the big machine.
Yeah. Hey, but they're loving it, right?
Good for them. Good for them.
Yeah. So The Waterfall did not release in this double album. It released as a single album. This one was also nominated for a Grammy. They lost to Alabama Shakes, which is interesting to me because Alabama Shakes is fronted, one of the headliners of Alabama Shakes is Brittany Howard. Brittany Howard did some of the backup vocals on this album. So, maybe that was Brittany to thank for all these Grammy nominations here. But yeah, this one to me, I'm like, I can be done with this. I don't really need to hear this. This is one that I did not listen to prior to this listen through for the podcast.
Yeah.
And probably won't go back to it again. So that was 2015, Waterfalls 1. Not to be confused with, now we're 2020, Waterfalls 2. You didn't like the first go round? Well, just wait. There's more. So they released half of these tracks as Waterfalls 1. And then 2015, 2016, they kept talking about there's a lost album. There's a lost album because they had so many tracks. Nothing really came of it. 2020 comes around. COVID hits, right? So Jim James is doing kind of what many of us did during COVID, which is go for a walk around the neighborhood. And I'm a walk around the neighborhood person. Tom is a walk around the neighborhood person. So Jim James is walking around his neighborhood with his iPod playing. And one of these lost tracks just is on his shuffle, which is funny to me, thinking that he's got does he have a whole iPod that's just My Morning Jacket tunes that he's listening to, or is this mixed in?
That's hilarious because it makes me feel less bad about watching old episodes of this. We only have two, but going back and watching them. So apparently Jim James does the same thing.
If it's good enough for Jim James,
Yeah.
it's good enough for Tom. So this track pops up on his COVID walk, and he's like, "Oh, I forgot about this. Let's release this other record." "Spinning My Wheels" is the track that came on. So then they decided to revisit all these old tracks, and here we have Waterfalls 2. This one, again, like, take it or leave it. This is a leave it for me. How do you, what do you think? You're in the same camp?
Well, like I said, I didn't do any research. And so just to make sure I understand, so the songs on this one were recorded at the same time?
All recorded back in 2015. It was actually like
Interesting.
18 months of recording. 2014,
Yeah.
2015. Took a long, long time for them to record because they wanted to just see what happened. Jim James was dealing with some physical limitations with his back and other things at this time. So this was a long process, and then they just kind of shelved half of these tracks.
So
then we get the second half released.
It does explain a lot because they do sound very similar, like the albums. But I thought the two, like if you combine them, I thought the two strongest tracks were on part 2. Run It is a really good song. And then I don't know how this song works, but Climbing the Ladder has that pedal steel that's playing over like almost a disco beat. And like that shouldn't work, but somehow it does. And I thought those two tracks were the best out of any tracks on those two albums.
On both of those albums. These albums also, as they were recording, all of their previous albums, they either recorded to tape or they recorded live. And so very kind of old school recording.
Yeah.
Waterfall 1, Waterfall 2, they recorded digitally. So after they record, they have this kind of ability to kind of cut and paste and overlap, much easier than they did on, a tape recording. So you do find a lot of that here where you have examples of kind of digital things spliced together to kind of put some things together. So maybe that's what you're hearing in this disco pedal steel.
Again, it's not something that I realized that they had switched to digital like in my own listening, but now that you say it, it completely makes sense. The other thing I jotted down in my own notes for this, for Waterfall 2, but it definitely applies to Waterfall 1 as well, is I wrote the paradox of trying. And stay with me for a second, but I think we can all understand that you can tell when a band or an artist or whatever is trying too hard. And any of us trying too hard at something is just profoundly uncool. But there's also, I think for a lot of artists, they reach a certain point where it feels like they're not trying at all. And I perceived, whether it's fair or not, a distinct lack of trying on Waterfall and Waterfall 2. And other than maybe, the handful of tracks I mentioned, I'm just like, why am I listening to this? Like, these guys feel like they're barely putting effort into this.
Yeah, barely. I feel the same way. The only track that I would return to on Waterfall 2, I think, is Run It. It's probably the only one that I would revisit. And, 18 months is a long project. So maybe they were just done and phoning it in by the end. And, this is what they had to show for it. So the final of their studio albums, because they've had a number of live albums put in, scattered in here that we did not take a listen to, and maybe we should have for such a band that is known as the live band. Maybe we should have checked out a live album. But in 2021, their 9th studio album, we have their self-titled My Morning Jacket. So, Tom, what do you think of this self-titled 9th album?
Well, as we've established before, I think, with Stone Temple Pilots, when I think late period self-titled album, I'm thinking return to form. Like, clearly, this is the Getting Back to Your Roots album. And wow, it's anything but. My expectations were thoroughly subverted. I also wrote down Scott Weiland, all is forgiven in terms of lyrical silliness, because this album is filled with just...
Yep.
The opening track, first of all, the opening track is called Regularly Scheduled Programming, which is like the lamest title. Like, that is just... Is Jim James a dad? Because that is like peak dad level humor. And like the lyrics to that song, he's complaining about like people being on their phones and like screen time. Mm-hmm. And I wrote down, who is this for? Because it feels like this is the kind of thing that would appeal to old, curmudgeonly dads. Yeah. But the music is like too weird. Boy. Right. And the music itself. Boy, right? Yeah. But the music in this album is too weird to appeal to dads. It's like, I don't know how to describe the music. You just have to listen to it. Like, there's a song on here called Love, Love, Love that is just the dregs.
Hate, Tom?
Yes, that would be a more apt title. There's one track on here called Least Expected that I kind of enjoyed. It sort of had like a bossa nova feel to it that I enjoyed. But man, I mentioned before that I had a hard time classifying their previous albums in terms of like genre. Mm-hmm. And I have an even harder time with this one.
Sure.
It's barely rock.
I don't scraping know. The bottom of the barrel here for sure.
I've said everything. I don't want to be more negative. Adrienne, have at it.
Yeah, this one, looking back, the last time they've recorded is Waterfalls 1 way back in 2015, right? So there's been 6 years since they've recorded. Talking about this album coming to fruition, Jim James had said, like, we didn't even know if there was going to be another album. So they were kind of maybe hanging up their hats already. His body is, like, wrecked from all this touring. They're getting older. They probably have enough money that they can kind of do what they want at this point, right? Not so much of the grind anymore, the early days. And so this album is interesting because different from all the other previous albums, only My Morning Jacket was on this album and produced this album. So there were no outside producers. This was just them, which makes sense. When looking at the list of album titles, I'm like, what is with this self-titled 9th album? Like, you can self-title your first or maybe second album, and that's it for me. Past 2, no, you don't get to self-title anymore. But hearing that this was just the band putting everything into this, I was like, okay, fine. For that, you get a pass. I understand. It makes sense to kind of let the world know that this album was just wholly My Morning Jacket, whether for good or for bad. And I guess, in your opinion, for bad. The only track that I really enjoy on this is maybe Never in the Real World, but the rest is, again, can kind of leave it behind. So that's that for me. 9 albums.
9 albums.
We have chatted through.
Yep.
Tom, top 3, bottom 1. This is
all right.
The best part of the show, if you ask me.
Yeah, look, it's a highlight.
Go ahead. Let's start with your number 3, Tom.
Sure.
Number 3, yeah?
Number 3 was tough. There were a couple albums that I think were close. Well, there were 2, really, that were close. I ended up going with At Dawn, narrowly edging out Evil Urges. It just really sets the stage for what My Morning Jacket would become. It has, I would say, 4 or 5 tracks that are just essential live tunes for My Morning Jacket. And in the long run, I think it has more songs that I enjoy than Evil Urges does. And nothing that I outright don't enjoy. So yeah, I picked That Dawn.
Okay. For me, number 3, It Still Moves. I think that's a great, that's My Morning Jacket.
Yeah.
Right there. Great album. Still go back to it regularly. Enjoy it a lot. But not enough to top the list. But for me, that was my number 3. Number 2 for you, Tom?
Number 2 is It Still Moves. And the top 2 are far above the others, in my opinion, with this catalog. It Still Moves is, just an incredible album. It's one that I've listened to for, going on 20 years and just never get tired of it. It's a very diverse album in terms of sound, even though they have sort of the same, they have certain, quirks that appear in all of their songs. There are songs that are very intense. There are songs that are very long. There are songs that are short. There are songs that are quiet. And they do all those things well, I think. They're really finding their stride. If you were only going to give someone one album to describe My Morning Jacket and to let someone know who they were, who they are, what they sound like, In my opinion, it would be It Still Moves.
Sure.
It's the one that sounds the most like them.
Yep. Yep.
Who's
Well,
your
and
number
they
two?
kind of
Yeah, sorry.
they were kind of undeveloped.
Yeah.
Got to It Still Moves, developed their sound, and then from there went back out again into kind of the more exploratory type thing. So yeah, that makes sense. For me, number 2, Circuitous. I love that album. I enjoy it a lot. I think to me, listening to that, just kind of this like, again, I mentioned it before, but the kind of forward motion of this album, and you just gotta listen to it and feel the momentum here. I don't know, something about it. I love that album, and I love a lot of the tracks on there. It's fun. They're toe tappers. I'm big on toe tappers. So that album to me was a winner for sure.
This is, I think, in our short history of top threes, this is the most different top
Most
three, I
varied
think.
that we
Yeah,
had,
wow.
yeah.
Circuitous. Wow.
Yeah.
It's big. All right.
Okay, number 1.
Number 1 is Z. I mean, it was never going to be anything else. As I said, incredibly tight album, 10 tracks. They're all great. You mentioned that it was on a lot of best of lists. For my money, if this is not the best album of the first decade of the 2000s, it's top 3. But I think it's probably the best in my opinion. Up there with like Because of the Times by Kings of Leon, in my opinion, would be another one. But this is just a monster of an album. And again, it doesn't get old. Sounds as fresh today as it did when it was released. This album, I mean, is a monumental artistic achievement, and just an all-time favorite of mine.
Yeah, that's great. And I'm sure many people would agree with you that tops their list as well. For me, number 1, Evil Urges, which I
Wow.
did not. Yeah, I did
Wow.
not foresee that at all. I don't know. I think the whole package, just start to finish, that's a great album. I don't know. I feel like it is a unified presentation, and I enjoy a lot of those songs, and I did not see that coming. I'm surprised that Z didn't make my list at all, because that
I'm
was
shocked.
such a meaningful album to me, and one that I really enjoyed. But no, it got bumped off the list. So Evil Urges number 1.
Wow. Fascinating. Man, I'm blown
Yeah.
away.
Yeah, we're way far apart on this one. Perhaps we can bring it back together with the bottom of the list. So what was your bottom choice?
This one was tough. This one was actually
Yeah.
really tough. In the end, I had to go Tennessee Fire. I just don't ever want to hear it again.
Ooh.
I'm sorry, my Morning Jacket fans who are going to, if any of them listen to this, give me hell in the comments. But I just don't want to hear it again. You know what won me over was I had a beer with Andy earlier today, and he was like, I once saw Target was selling My Morning Jacket self-titled for $8, and I'm like, you didn't get me one? Like, I'd buy it for $8.
Well, I'll sell you our copy for $8 because My Morning Jacket self-titled was the bottom of my list. That one, done. So, yeah, the bottom choice for me was between Waterfall 1, Waterfall 2, and My Morning Jacket. And actually, Andy and I were laughing about this week because we will come to find out that we own all 3 of those on vinyl. And I'm like, why?
That's hilarious.
Why did we buy these 3? Well, I think we bought them without previous listening. So, anyway, that's that. Yeah, okay, so even the bottom of the list we can't come together on.
No.
On that. Interesting. I wonder what band, how many episodes are we going to have to do before we have a similar top 3, bottom 1 list? I don't think it'll ever happen. Mark my words, it will never happen.
Probably not. Probably not.
And that's probably part of what makes this so good, right?
Yeah.
If we all agreed on
Yeah.
everything.
It wouldn't be interesting then.
It'd be silly. All right, so I mentioned we had some of them on vinyl. I have a whole stack here. Tom, what do you have on vinyl by My Morning Jacket?
I actually do not own any My Morning Jacket
None?
vinyl. I really need Z. I just haven't bought it. And of course, I mean, It Still Moves eventually, but that's such a long album. I know it's a double, and it's like, ugh. But at least
They're all
Z fits.
doubles.
Z doesn't fit on one record?
Oh, a ton of them are doubles. They are all 45s. It's like 2 songs and you got to flip. It's a pain in the ass to listen to.
All right, Adrienne, you got it on vinyl?
Yeah, you ready? Okay, I do. I have, ta-da! We have, it still moves here. This one is actually funny. I'm going to reference the cover here, so I apologize if anyone is listening and not watching, but you see this, it's this bear covered in tinsel in this weird wooden structure. This was not like dreamed up by some graphic designer somewhere. This was a real taxidermied bear that the band had at Above the Cadillac Studios, and there is old footage of the band dragging this bear into a barn and putting different Halloween costumes on it, draping this tinsel. They're kind of art directing this album. So they all had their hands right in this this album cover. We have this one. We have Z. We have, unfortunately, Waterfalls 1. We have Waterfalls 2. We have My Morning Jacket, which is going to miraculously just show up at Tom's house and be in the shelf. And then I have all these live albums that we should have done in the early years, which has all of my old tracks that I stole off the internet on it. So
Nice.
a lot of My Morning Jacket at our
Nice.
vinyl. Which is funny to me, though, because I don't have Evil Urges and I don't have Circuital, which are the 2 that I really
That is
want.
kind of
So
funny.
I need to track those down.
And the Tennessee Fire. You got to get that 25th anniversary Tennessee Fire.
Maybe if it's $8 at Target, but probably not. Probably not. All right. So every episode, we have decided that whomever is hosting will have a bonus question that somewhat relates to this topic or band. And so as the host, I have a bonus question, but it requires a little bit of setup here. Tom, were you ever familiar? Tom is a big reader and a big sports guy. Tom, do you know Grantland.com? I thought you might know Grantland.com.
I was an avid Grantland reader, RIP,
Okay.
to both Grantland Rice and the website Grantland.
Okay, so do you want to explain what Grantland was quickly in just 5 seconds?
Yeah, it was sort of like a boutique sports writing. It was under the ESPN umbrella. ESPN gave it, there was a writer named Bill Simmons, personality, who had this idea, and they gave him like total autonomy, and he hired all these like sort of offbeat writers, I would say, and they didn't just cover sports; they covered a lot of different topics.
Yeah, like sports, pop culture. So
they were great.
In reading an article on Grantland.com about My Morning Jacket, the author, and unfortunately I don't know who the author is, I don't have it in front of me, but the author referenced Circuital, which is one of my top choices, as, quote, the presence of MMJ's discography, referring to Led Zeppelin and their album Presence, which for any other band would be fine, but in their catalog was crap, right? So my question to you, Tom, is what other band, what is kind of the presence of their catalog? What is a fine album, just if somebody else had released it, but for that band, it's just total trash? What do you think? And I'm happy to share first if you'd like.
I'll go. It's a great question, and it took me a little while, but I did think of my answer, and that is Vitology by Pearl Jam. That is Pearl Jam's 3rd album. They were still at the peak of their, success, and I hate that album. It's a very popular album, and I think well regarded by most people. I think the production's awful. They fired their drummer as they were wrapping up recording, and I'm going to save most of these thoughts for our inevitable Pearl Jam episode. But yeah, Vitology for another band, I think would be something I would enjoy. But for Pearl Jam, I can't stand it.
Got it. And for me, a couple months ago this summer, I was lucky enough, we went and saw Wilco in concert, and Wilco has so many great releases, but the album Schmilko by Wilco is just toss it in the trash. So that one,
I've never heard it.
Well, don't go listen to it. It's it just has maybe like one track that I would maybe save and kind of pluck off of there, but which is Just Say Goodbye. But the rest of it is like not even worth the 2 seconds and the pennies that the band is going to get if you listen to it. So leave it alone. But hearing someone refer to Circuital as the presence of My Morning Jacket's catalog,
that's really funny.
Was kind of Yeah, not to me, because I enjoy that album a lot. I was like, who is this person? And they have terrible opinions. So anyway, that rolls right in to our kind of wrap up question at the end of these episodes. So far we've talked about Led Zeppelin, Stone Temple Pilots, My Morning Jacket. Tom, if you're rating these bands, where do they stand on the ratings?
Well, we already established that I am a crazy person, and STP is above Led Zeppelin in my own personal ranking. I can't put My Morning Jacket above Led Zeppelin. My Morning Jacket is a fine band. I enjoy them, and especially if bands for this century. They're in the upper echelon, by far. But no, they are third out of three of our bands for me. How about for you?
Yeah, I agree. Cannot put them above Led Zeppelin, which is my top ranking so far. Previously I have Led Zeppelin and then Stone Temple Pilots. My Morning Jacket is just going to wedge themselves right in the middle.
I respect that.
Spoiler alert: Stone Temple Pilots will probably stay at the bottom of my list for a while. So we've got Led Zeppelin.
They will, because I know who we're picking. I know who we're picking next week, and yes, they will remain at the bottom.
Okay. This is the moment I have been waiting for. Maybe the listeners have been waiting for as well. Yeah. I chose My Morning Jacket this week, unbeknownst to Tom, until I shared it during the last episode. And Tom is now going to share what band we will be taking a look at their catalog for our next episode.
So,
take it away, Tom.
All right. Well, great job with choosing this one, because I really enjoyed it. And, I did want to sort of start to fill in gaps as we go forward, and we have yet to do a female artist, and we have yet to do anyone from the 80s. I think the only album we've done that's come out in the 80s is Coda, which
doesn't count.
Doesn't count because it was recorded in the late 70s, as we've established. So, Adrienne, we're doing Stevie Nicks.
Oh, beautiful.
We're doing Stevie Nicks
solo,
not Fleetwood Mac.
Okay.
We're doing Stevie Nicks solo. She has 8 solo albums. And we are also doing her later compilation. It's called like Songs from the Vault. Because she has a lot of historically significant songs that she wrote during the Fleetwood Mac years it's a compilation that I think is essential to a look at Stevie Nicks.
Okay.
So 9,
awesome.
We're sticking with 9.
9 is like the
consistent.
magic number here.
All 8 albums, and then her Vault compilation there at the end.
Awesome. Well, twist my arm to listen to Stevie Nicks.
I figured you could
Thanks,
be coerced into that.
That's going to be a great episode. And to anyone who is hung on this long to hear the reveal, thank you so much for listening to the whole episode. We appreciate you taking the time. We appreciate, again, the comments and, the emails that you've sent to Tom and I. The little text messages on the side are awesome. We really, really appreciate the support, and we have a good time doing this, so we hope that you have a good time listening as well.
Yes. Like, comment, subscribe, hopefully in that order. Adrienne, you hosted a great episode. Thank you so much. This was a blast.
Thanks, Tom. Yeah, it was awesome.
All right.
Next time.
See you all next time.